Well, my friends, welcome to Friday night on UFO Classified. I have to tell you that it took every ounce of energy in me to get out of bed and to try to be here tonight. Actually, I only had 2 hours of sleep in 48 hours. Most of you know who've been following me that my life has been rather tumultuous as of late, and I am gracefully learning how to be resilient. And I'm looking to people. Actually, I'm not looking to the universe because Ray and I just had this discussion before we got on the air. I won't ask the universe to show me how to be resilient. That's probably a bad plan. But I do have to say that I am very, very grateful for all of your support, for your love through the most difficult time of my life. Sorry, I'm going to try not to choke on myself and then cry and things, and I need to get waterproof mascara. But anyway, it's been very trying, and I think that I've been, and I'm sorry, hang on one second, you guys. This is me. I'm such a dork. Way to do an intro. And this is where I wish I wouldn't have pressed the go live button, which I usually don't. So we could have like a 10-minute conversation off air. And then everybody's wondering where we are. But yeah, it's been very interesting as of late. And I have to say that I have met in the past couple months some amazing people who care very much about people who have been in domestic violence situations, and they inspire me, they give me strength, and they also are helping to create a network of people all over the country that can be there and support each other and get through some really horrific things. And so to me, that's if there's a light at the end of this tunnel, it's finding that connection and finding wonderful human beings that teach me how to be humble and how to be a better person. So on that note, I will say my guest this evening is one of those people because I look at him and I look at the trials and struggles that he goes through. And every time I see him, he has the biggest smile on his face. And it's just, how do you do this? I'm like, I mean, here you are having this surgery. Here you are, doing chemo. And it's like, I never see you without this glow.
Yeah.
And so, Ray Boeche, welcome to the show. I am a big fan of yours. I've always loved learning from you. You have done work on the Men in Black, MJ-12, Rendlesham. And I have to say, this little number, which I have been looking at for quite some time, you were the inspiration to this. And I love learning from you, and you're so grounded. When I hear you speak, you don't make assumptions. You're not saying that this is what it is. You're leaving that open. And I think that is such an important thing to do when you are broaching this subject, because all too often we can find people that are willing to use this subject as a platform to maybe steer the political narrative, to create fear, to create a place that that doesn't raise our vibration. Wow, that sounded really hippie-ish. I don't know. But you know what I mean? I mean, it's just, I really hippie-ish. Well, it is now, I guess. But I mean, Ray, you have such a long background. You research, the Fortean, you were head of the Fortean Research Center. You have a bachelor's of art, a master of theology, a doctor of theology. I mean, I could go on and on. Former graphic designer. You're a pastor. You just have done so much. And like I said, you're just a really, really amazing person.
Well, thank you, Erica. I'm grateful for that. I have been through. I've been through a lot, and the only thing I can say that has brought me through it is my faith, and that's what keeps me grounded. It's what gives me the ability to look at these sorts of paranormal things, odd things, and search not for my truth, but the truth that underlies it. And so I've always tried to be cautious and not take a really pedantic, dogmatic stance about, it's not a soapbox for me to stand on. It's not even about me. Yeah, it's about the subject itself. And if I can help to dig through some of the matrix that surrounds it and get to the kernel of what's really there, that's what I'm after.
And I love that. And I mean, I show interviewing you, having personal conversations with you over the years, watching you and your very dedicated study of all of this and your research. It's so cool. And I learn from people like you. And when I go to a place where I've seen so much of the man-made interference and so much negativity, it's really important to have your perspective again, because it brings it back around for me, so I can, maybe remember the reason I love this subject, because that's been a little hard for me to get lately.
It's I have been several points in my, gosh, what now, 55 years of researching these things. I have been lost in the weeds a time or two, and it's I'm so grateful that I've been able to stay fairly well grounded and fairly well centered. And my interest in this is intellectual at one level, it's spiritual at another level, and it's very practical at a third level, because people have experiences dealing with these sorts of events. How do they begin to make sense of them? How do they frame them in a reasonable context so that they can incorporate these events into their own lives without going mad, which unfortunately happens occasionally. And so, I'm just thankful that what I have tried to accomplish is what you see. So.
Well, I can't believe. I mean, if I can make it 20 years, in this subject publicly, I will be excited. If I can make it to next Friday, I'll be more excited, because I'm just like, oh, Mama's gonna throw in the towel here pretty quick. But then again, it's like I was telling Barry Greenwood before the show, I'm just like, Barry, I'm done. Tonight's my last show. I never want to talk about UFOs. Forget about it. It's going to be every Friday night. We're going to talk about horror movies or music or art, or, something that doesn't, kind of bring me to that dark place. And so thank you for, again, motivating me to actually do next Friday's show.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
And so, since you've been in this for so long, what initially sparked your interest? Why did you gravitate towards this subject?
It started in 1965. It was in July. We were on the back porch of our house, and this enormous, brightly glowing disc moved directly over our house from south to north. And from that point on, I was captivated by the whole idea of UFOs, flying saucers, because I'd seen something that I couldn't explain. I have always been a very, well, let's just say a precocious child. And I always had a very insatiable curiosity. So I got interested, and I got involved in a peripheral way with NICAP and APRO at the time. Began to read as much as I could find on the subject. And the first really major thing that I was involved with on a personal level was in 1968, shortly after the first of the year, when I had a chance to talk with Herb Schirmer, the policeman in Ashland, Nebraska, who had been abducted. And that was quite a treat. And the fact that he would let this 12-year-old kid talk with him.
That is so rad. Oh, I love it.
But that was really the first thing, and then that really sort of, that's the bug that bit me, and I thought, this is fascinating stuff. I need to stay with this, and so I've been involved more or less deeply ever since.
12 years old.
12 years old.
Isn't that funny? Like, and I remember, I mean, I was I was in grade school, you know, and I picked a book off the shelf. Is something up there? I think it was Dale. Oh, who was it? Dale White. And I think I've got a picture of, I don't know, what I was drawing in grade school, which really disturbed, I think, my teachers. They're like, why aren't you drawing Barbies? You know, I mean, Kens, whatever you're doing, but why are you drawing these little bug-eyed creatures and ants on their back, you know, help, and different things. And so you know, I mean, I got intrigued by this at a young age too. And it's interesting to see how most of us who are here in chat or listen to the show, I mean, there was always been this fascination. And it is a really interesting subject on multiple layers. Like you say, there's so many layers to the subject, and it can really, you know, for me, when I look at the things that I've learned just about, you know, I mean, about other human beings, I've learned
Mhm.
about, you know, astronomy and all of, you know, geology and all sorts of, you know, the FAA, you know, blah blah blah. I mean, different, and you know, hidden technology, blah, you know, all that stuff. But I mean, it's enriched my life in so many ways that is, again, giving me hope. So that, I mean, it makes me happy when you know, you think about some of those things that you learn and other people don't have a clue about, and that's a nice thing, even if we're
I
nerds.
I've kind of found that this subject forces you, it's not a good way to put it, entices you to become very much a Renaissance person, because you're exposed to and then pulled into so many different areas of science and history and folklore, and it's an amazing thing, and it's a very enriching subject to get involved in.
And so you're 12 years old, you know, you've got this bug. What is your family thinking?
They tolerated it. uh, I, you know, it was yeah, it was tolerated. The one of the things that one of the big struggles I had was with arguments with my mother over our phone bill, because I would be making phone calls to long distance calls to John Keel in New York or Ivan Sanderson in New Jersey.
Oh my God.
And so she would, it was always, you know, I always kind of wanted to run and hide if I knew the phone bill had come.
You know, I remember this is, I mean, I wasn't talking to John Keel, mind you, but remember going over to Europe. I was in the University of Utah choir. And so we went over and toured Europe. And I remember calling my boyfriend, you know, I mean, a little too much. I should have gone out and done some sightseeing. But yeah, the family got the phone bill on that one. It wasn't pretty. But at least you've got better stories. You were talking to Ivan Sanderson and John Keel.
Uh,
That's so cool. So, I mean, so they were accepting, and then,
yeah, I mean, between John and Ivan, and I had a lot of contact with Gray Barker at the time. Jim and Coral Lorenzen, spoke often with them. Um, it was, yeah, they were very tolerant. Let's put it that way. I don't think I came across as just, you know, a pesky kid. I think I was able to frame things in a way that so that they understood I had an actual genuine interest in this, and had begun to develop some understanding of it. They were very helpful. They were very helpful.
And it's interesting because John Greenwald started in the subject when he was just a wee lad, and I almost said wee lass, but that might not work well for him. But I mean, he remembers having, sending letters to Stan Friedman and different people, and feeling kind of that same way. Just this, you're young and you're trying to get your bearing, and then you have people that reach out to you and are tolerant or take you under their wings, and that's a very cool thing. And so what was your impression of all of these characters? Specifically, let's talk about John Keel, because he sounded like a very interesting man.
Yeah.
John was, it depended on when you got a hold of John. From my perspective, I would say, looking back, he could be a very mercurial person.
I bet.
It depended on what was going on in his life and what the level of bizarre activity in his own life was at the time. But for the most part, John was interested in what I had to say. And there had been some things that had happened around my hometown that I was interested to run by him. And there were, as time went on, began to see then some parallels between what was going on there and what was happening in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the 66 to 67, 68 timeframe. So I think that caught his attention, that he didn't at the time explain the similarities, and I was just explaining what was happening that I was being exposed to. But John was an interesting guy. We didn't ever meet until the 80s. We actually met face to face then, and brought him out a couple of times to speak at conferences here in Lincoln. And wonderful guy, just a character, a character.
I would say so. And Gray Barker, talk about Gray Barker.
Gray Barker was an interesting guy. He was a great storyteller. Gray certainly knew the difference between a story and the facts. But a lot of times he didn't let the facts get in the way of a good story. So
right. Absolutely. That's a really great way to put that.
But again, he was a very cordial man. Had some great conversations with him, and some really kind of poignant conversations toward the end of his life as he was dying of something that the doctors couldn't pin down yet. But yeah, just a very lovely and gracious man. Yeah, I liked him a lot.
And so did you find that they had, what were their political leanings?
I don't, I would say, and again, in retrospect, at the time, I don't think I had a clue as to what they might have been. John Keel, I would say, was very much a libertarian. I would say Gray Barker was probably very much a classic liberal. Ivan Sanderson was, the best way to describe his political readings, British. But Ivan was an interesting guy too. But I just found them very, very open to, and I was very grateful for that they didn't just say, "Oh, you stupid kid," and hang up on me. They were great experiences.
And so, obviously, talk about, because with John Keel and some of the things that were happening that you were hearing about on your end and that John was experiencing on his end, what were some of the similarities?
There were, there's an area, my hometown is Nebraska City, Nebraska, down the southeast corner of the state, home of Arbor Day, just to put a historical context on it there.
Nelly, well, you can't beat that here in Salt Lake, that's for sure.
So there was a little town, former town, called Minersville. It had started in the 1840s as a river crossing. Some guy had settled there and built a raft and would ferry people back and forth across the Missouri River. And then as this little settlement began to grow, they discovered a seam of coal. And so they started to mine coal, and it was called Minersville. Well, by the time the mid-60s rolled around, there was nothing there except a grain elevator and a few houses. That's all that was left. In 1968, there began a series of monster sightings. This is the best way I can describe it. It was kind of a typical Bigfoot-like creature. Some high school girls were coming home. This thing stepped out in the road in front of them. They stopped. It caved the hood of their car in. A boy was riding along this gravel county road on his bicycle. This thing jumped out and threw him off the bike. Hunters had seen it. A man that I worked for when I was in high school rented some land in that area and raised watermelons. And he was down there one evening in the summer checking on his watermelons. And he was standing there looking out across this field, standing with his back to the west, and the sun was going down. And he sees this long shadow coming up alongside him, and he figures it's the farmer who owns the land. He would never tell me what he saw. And let me preface this by saying this man was a tank commander in World War II during the Battle of the Bulge. This is a guy who would, for fun, would climb a rope 40 feet up into a tree and then slide down the rope without any gloves on.
Wow.
It takes all kinds. But my grandfather was in the Battle of the Bulge. So yeah, that was.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, they toughened up well. And so this is a guy who was not afraid of much. And he would never tell me what he saw, but a buddy of mine and I had decided we wanted to go camp out down in this area to see if we could see anything. And he literally said, "You go down there and try and camp out." He said, "I'll come down and haul you guys out of there because it's not safe." So I don't know what he saw, but it was evidently this creature. So there's a lot of this going on. And then this creature would have the infuriating habit of appearing and then disappearing. And so it was one of the first instances of the kind of the vanishing Bigfoot, the supernatural Bigfoot. And always described as having the self-luminous glowing red eyes. At the same time, there were reports of this giant bird-like thing in the same area. About the size of a man with, anywhere from a 12 to 20 foot wingspan. People were never sure. So very much similar to the whole Mothman kind of thing. And so that's some of the things that were happening. And then just a lot of bizarre things that began to happen to people who had witnessed these things. So there's just a whole catalog of weird things that were going on in that particular area. And the thing that really fascinated me with it, my grandfather was born in Auburn, Nebraska, which is about 20 miles south of there, in 1891. From the time he was a child, there were all kinds of rumors that you didn't want to be in the woods around Minersville at night because there was something. There were Black Panther sightings, wild man sightings, all sorts of things like that from the turn of the 20th century on. And so there's a long kind of storied history in that area of these things going on. So that's what the initial impetus was, to get a hold of John and say, "It seems like you've got a handle on this, on what's going on there, but let me tell you about this. Does this sound similar to you?"
And so let me ask you, how did you, I mean, how did you first hear about the reports, and then how did people start approaching you? I mean, where did they find you? How did you make yourself available?
I had the first thing that I had seen that I was aware of was a piece in our local paper about the police having investigated these monster sightings and some calves being killed. Again, now this was not the man that I knew, but someone else who had a watermelon patch that had been raided by some sort of animal that had eaten a bunch of melons. My parents were good friends with the chief of police in Nebraska City. So I called him and said, "Hey, what's going on? Can you tell me about this?" He then put me in contact with some of the folks down there. And then that started, as word got around that, hey, this kid's interested in weird stuff. So we know we've got a sympathetic ear with this kid. So I would begin to hear things that way.
Wow. Isn't that interesting? I mean, that reminds me of Junior Hicks, here in the Uinta Basin, and somebody that just made himself accessible, and people felt comfortable even in, I mean, obviously the Uinta Basin, that area is very LDS and things, but he, was one of those people you could you could tell sightings like that too. And I really appreciate that. He was such a lovely man. And so you're getting all these sightings, you're learning about different things. What were your initial thoughts? And have they changed over the years?
I think the first my first initial impression, based on what I had read, was, these must be something from another planet. That's kind of the typical extraterrestrial hypothesis. Because it was kind of like the only game in town to begin with. But it wasn't long after that I began, probably with the Herb Shermer thing, the chance to talk to this man who'd been taken aboard one of these things. And there were so many things that just didn't seem to quite gel with it being a straightforward physical occurrence. There were just some odd things there. And then the behavior of some of these creatures in the Minersville area, and some of the poltergeist-like activity that people were describing that had happened after they'd encountered these things. It struck me really early on that, as I discovered later, when he enunciated it, John Valet was right on the money when he said the extraterrestrial hypothesis is too simple for this. That's too elementary an explanation for everything that takes place. And so it didn't take me long after I delved into it, because of the mix of things that I was encountering, that there's got to be more to this. I've always said, and this, I think the first time, excuse me, I wrote this down was probably in 1968. And I wrote some little note to myself about what I needed to develop was a unified field theory of the unexplained, because it all seems to dovetail together in so many ways. That just fueled my interest in so many other areas of the paranormal. And I really like that term, the paranormal, which literally translated means alongside the normal. So we have this whole stream of bizarre things that exist alongside the normal, and occasionally they intermesh. So yeah, it's does that answer the question?
Yes, yes, it does. And I mean, and I have to ask you because, from my work in researching places like Skinwalker Ranch, where I believe, an artificial narrative has been created by people to make money and for other reasons. Was there, sometimes you can use specific places, insert a narrative, and then watch people go, watch their imaginations, create things. And it's kind of fun. You know, you're looking at something and you're photographing a sundog and you're thinking it's a UFO, or you look up and you see chemtrails that are making a cross and it's a religious experience, and all of these things. And I've seen that, you know, happen time and time again in the Uinta Basin. And so how do you differentiate? How did you differentiate between something that was truly paranormal or something that was kind of like that group kind of think?
That was actually, I'll tell you, that was one of the first questions that I ever posed to John Keel, was how do you separate the real from the imagined? And he gave me some excellent tips that I still find work very well today. And that's looking past questions about just the event that was experienced, but some of the things that surround that. And once you do that, then you can begin to separate, well, was this, I'll give you an example. In the mid 80s, we investigated a series of Bigfoot sightings in a small town southwest of Lincoln. And the family on whose property this had taken place had several sightings of this prototypical Bigfoot-like creature, frightening their horses, breaking down a fence, leaving hair on a barbed wire fence, going down into a patch of woods on their land, leaving tracks. They called the Game and Parks Commission and said, something's going on here. They came out. The game officers wouldn't go down into the woods to look. So they just tried to put on, well, you know, we don't know what it is, but it's nothing to worry about. Well, those kinds of sightings continued for a period of about 3 years off and on. And the interesting thing was, at the same time, shortly after these had started, and this is, let's see, it's a remote farmhouse, but it's a modern farmhouse, but it's probably 2 miles to the nearest neighbor. So it's not like you can walk up to the door and ring the bell and suddenly disappear. You're going to be seen. Their doorbell would ring, or they'd hear a knock on their front door, and they'd go to the door and there's nobody there. Things would move in the house. Water would turn on and off. Appliances would turn on and off. Power problems. No normal explanations for this, and they tried to search them all out. That had all the hallmarks of a real paranormal experience. These people had experienced something that was out of the ordinary. Then you run into situations where people will see something in the woods, at a distance. They don't know exactly what it is, but they can't recognize it. They convince themselves that it's something paranormal, something odd, but there's none of the sort of auxiliary equipment that goes along with the genuine sightings. Those I tend to separate and say, I can't tell you what you saw, but I can't get too excited about it. Yeah, I would never tell that to the witness, but you just realize you record it, but there's nothing you can do with it because it was probably a case of mistaken identification. So there's not much there. You learn to differentiate based on experience. And maybe one of the most crucial things, you learn to differentiate correctly by understanding what the actual phenomena is. or what it does, how it appears.
It's
If
so,
that makes any sense.
yeah, no, it does. And it's so interesting because I've kind of, again, like I've mentioned, I've kind of gone in, I've gone over to a place that I wish I hadn't gone, because now I'm not seeing the paranormal, and I'm seeing people that are steering a narrative, which I wanted to definitely get into the Collins elite, and talk a little bit about your experiences with that, because I have to wonder if some of those people weren't some of the same people steering the narrative today. That's another story. We'll get to that. But I mean, I just want to go ghost hunting again. I want to go do something. I want to go sit out in the field and look up and connect with the mothership, and just some of these things, have those moments again. But I'm telling you, Skinwalker Ranch did something to me. I don't know. So you did you Coral and Jim Lorenzen. I want to talk about them because they were larger than life figures in the subject back in the early days. What were your impressions of them?
I always thought, and again, my impression was always that Jim was much more cordial than Coral.
Was she spicy?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, she didn't seem to. She didn't have a lot of time or patience. It seemed to me with me, but if I got Jim, we would have great conversations, and he would engage with me, and it would be a fruitful discussion. Coral a little less so, but I have to say I really admire her writing and the things and her research skills. Some excellent things. One person in that period of time that I wish I'd have had some contact with was Joan Rittenauer. She wrote a lot of things, co-authored a lot of things with Brad Steiger. And Joan Rittenauer was an interesting woman who did a lot of interesting research, but again, I never had the opportunity to connect with her. But yeah, the Lorenzens, in my estimation, I thought I always had a little softer spot in my heart for APRO than I did the work of NICAP.
Interesting.
I always thought NICAP was a little too eager to hold anything that might not be strictly the extraterrestrial hypothesis at arm's length. And even some of the things, I mean, NICAP didn't want anything to do with landed craft, and especially nothing to do with any occupants who were seen. That was, I mean, those were nutcase reports as far as NICAP was concerned. And I always thought that was a big mistake, because how can we ever get an answer to what's going on here if we ignore this whole body of evidence just because it doesn't fit with our narrow interpretation of what that evidence should be? We don't necessarily have nice, neat categories to put these things into. And you run into a great deal of, it's dangerous to ignore that which doesn't fit your narrative, because that just tells me maybe my narrative isn't quite what it should be.
But it is interesting, when I look, I was over in Norway a few years ago. I've got to go back. But, they're all scientists. They're looking for specific things. And so they have to kind of narrow their focus instead of including a broader thing. And I think, there are reasons that they would have to do that. But I understand, that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. And I think the Hesselin lights are a really good example of, you've got a phenomena that is pretty focused and pretty narrow in its scope. So yeah, in situations like that, you have to be you have to eliminate as much noise as you can to get as much pure signal as possible.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with, why can't I think of his name? Project Identification, Harley Rutledge.
Right.
Harley Rutledge.
The work that he did in Southeast Missouri, pretty narrow set of phenomena that were going on. So yeah, you have to focus on that. But if you're taking the big picture view of a phenomena, if you compare the difference between NICAP reports and APRO reports, particularly the occupant sightings, this whole body of evidence that NICAP just wanted to deny, I don't think that serves anyone's interests well. At least consider them and say, this doesn't seem to fit in with the narrative I've constructed, but let's not get rid of it. As Stanton Friedman would say, let's put it in our gray basket, but don't just ignore it. And so, my impetus has always been, let's get all the information we can. And once we have this entire body of information, then let's see about trying to synthesize it into some sort of whole that can incorporate everything as part of the answer. Well,
Of course. I almost made it an hour. Yes. But you mentioned Harley, Rutledge and Project Identification, and I want to just give I want to give some props to Scott because he got on Mark Rutledge and we had him on the show to talk about his father's work. And so I would definitely just, tell people to go back and listen to that. It was a very cool interview, and Mark is a lovely, lovely guy. Very interesting. So thanks, Scott. Just wanted to throw that out there. But okay, so you've got all of these wonderful this cast of characters that are legendary, or they should be. If somebody's coming into the subject, they need to know about the Lorenzens and about NICAP and all of these John Keel and everything. And so you got the 60s and you're moving into the 70s. What's happening, and who are the people that you're coming into contact with?
I say maybe the most the most significant one that had the greatest impact on me was Bert Schwarz, Dr. Berthold Schwarz. He and I connected because I'd read UFO Dynamics and got a hold of Dr. Schwarz, and we would correspond occasionally. And it was always an adventure to get a letter from Dr. Schwarz, because he had the tiniest, most cramped handwriting that I've ever seen in my life.
So you could translate then, because Ann Druffel has talk about some gold mine there with Schwarz. Oh my gosh.
Between myself and a couple buddies and my mother, we would try to decipher the handwriting to see, what did Bert say this time?
See, and that's funny because that sounds like, Jim McDonald.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at, the research that Ann did on Firestorm, and I'm trying to read his writing, just going, translator, please. So that's interesting. But
it was interesting. And with Dr. Schwarz, the first major exchange of information and discussion that we had was with the whole Herbert Hopkins MIB thing that took place in Maine. Are you familiar with that?
Can you tell us? Because I'm sure that there are a lot of people that aren't familiar with that. Okay. That'd be cool.
There was an abduction case of two young men, and the woman who was investigating, I believe it was either for NICAP. I think it was NICAP. She knew of a medical doctor in Maine, Old Orchard Beach, who used hypnosis in his medical practice. And she asked him if he would be interested in helping with this investigation and perform hypnotic regression on one of these young men. And so he did. And it kind of the typical UFO abduction narrative begins to unfold. And one night, Hopkins' wife and son go to a movie, and he's left at the house by himself. The telephone rings, and it's someone who doesn't identify himself, but says he's with the New Jersey UFO Research Group, and he wants to talk about this case. Could he come over? And Hopkins said, yeah, come on over. Told him how to get there. And he said that was so untypical of him because he just didn't do that. And he said they'd had some problems in the past with his medical practice was on the first floor of the house they lived in. And because he had drugs on the premises, sometimes there'd been some break-ins and that sort of thing. He said, I just don't do that. But I said, yeah, come on over. He'd no more than hung the phone up than the doorbell rings. And he goes to the door, and here's this odd character in a black suit with a black derby bowler hat on, very pale, bright red lips. And he comes in, conversation ensues, really strange. The man was completely hairless, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, completely bald. He, at one point in time, touched his lips with his hands, with finger. He wore gray kid gloves rather than his hands.
I like that look.
Yeah, it's weird. And Hopkins noticed there was lipstick on the glove. And so he realized, he thought, okay, what's up with this guy? Yeah. And I think eventually he realized the guy put lipstick on because there was no distinction in color between his lips and his skin. So time goes on, and finally this guy says, you need to stop investigating this UFO abduction, and you need to destroy all your material. And he looks at him like he's crazy and says, what do you mean? And the man's this odd character says, reach in your pocket. You've got 2 coins in your pocket. And he reaches in, and he knew, how did you know that? Because he just paid the paper boy, and he had 11 cents that he got back, and that's what he had in his pocket. So he pulls out a penny. He says, hold it in your hand and watch it. So Hopkins holds it in his hand, and the penny starts to turn from a copper color to a silvery shimmery appearance and vanishes. And this character tells Hopkins, if you don't destroy this stuff, what happened to that penny is what happened to Barney Hill's heart. And that's what's going to happen to you. Then he starts to sort of run down in a very weird way. It starts to begin to talk more slowly and says he's running out of energy, goes to the door, walks out. And that's the last. There was a big flash of light then. And that's all that Hopkins knew until his family came home. Hopkins, in the meantime, was scared to death. And so he got all of his material and grabbed it and destroyed it. His wife and son come home, and he and the son go out to check in the driveway to see if they could see what this big flash of light was. There's a length of track, like a tracked vehicle, like a bulldozer would have made, but only 6 or 8 feet long. That's impressed into the gravel of the driveway. And there was no car. There was no time for this man to get from a phone to Hopkins' house in a matter of mere seconds. So he has no idea where he came from or how he left, other than this flash of light that had occurred outside. Then there's additional weird things that had happened later in connection with this with Hopkins' son. But as this began to unfold, Bert asked me if I would look this over and just tell him what I thought about it. So he sent me a lot of his notes. And again, I mean, you need a Rosetta Stone to decipher a lot of Bert's handwriting. So we had a bunch of things. I had two friends over. I said, help me go through this and let's get things, put in chronological order. And see if we can figure out what everything says here. And as we're sitting there, we're in my bedroom and we're at a table, and behind us are two windows. The door's over here, and we're working along trying to bring this, and suddenly we realize all of us are just overcome with this incredible sensation of fear. And we stop what we're doing. And literally we're just frozen in fright. It lasts for, it seemed an eternity. I suppose a minute, 2 minutes. And eventually, gradually just kind of dissipated. And we looked at each other and I said, don't say anything. Write down what you just experienced. Well, we did. All three of us did. And it was exactly the same thing. We were all convinced there was something behind us that was so terrifying we couldn't turn around and look at it because it would have been too frightening to see. It was the most unnerving experience I've ever had. And I think that probably goes for my two buddies, both of whom have passed on by now, which really makes me feel old. But none of the three of us were able to explain what exactly we had felt, and none of us ever experienced anything like that before or since. It was just the most gut-wrenching feeling of abject terror that you can imagine. Excuse me.
Wow.
So that was kind of the beginning of an interesting period of time with Bert Schwarz, and some interesting exchanges with him. He was a fascinating man, and a much underrated and underappreciated for the contributions he made, I think.
Ray, can I ask, did Dr. Schwartz ever correspond with you about Stella Lansing?
We talked about Stella Lansing quite a bit, but we never corresponded particularly about her. I was so fascinated with the work he was doing regarding her. But I was. That's an incredible case.
Yeah, so I knew her, and she lived about a mile from here. And this is where he came to visit her during his research that he was doing with her.
Interesting.
Yeah, so my research partner and I are trying to put together a small documentary about her, because a lot of the stuff that's out there is really, some of it's wrong and some of it's garbage, and so we're trying to put that together. So it's a very interesting case.
Yeah, Scott, I think a lot of people would be very interested in seeing that. Yeah, that would be good. That'd be valuable.
Yeah.
So, Stella Lansing. And sorry, I'm trying to multitask, and clearly I can't just unmute the mic and have a conversation. I don't know what. I'm telling you. And so you have this experience. You have the terror. You're communicating with Dr. Schwarz. I mean, what other things and tell us a little bit more about his background, because I know that there are people listening that don't know much or anything about him, actually.
Well, Berthold Schwarz was a psychiatrist, graduated from Cornell, brilliant man, wonderful man. I brought him here to Lincoln to along with Joe Newsom, who is a psychic individual that he was working with and doing research on, and that was an incredible experience to see Joe Newsom and what the things that he could perform, and to just be able to spend some time with Dr. Schwarz. But yeah, he was very well known in the field of psychiatry and did a lot of research into psychosomatic illnesses. He was intrigued by what effect the mind could have on the body. And the reason he got involved with psychics, and especially those who could heal, was to try to tap into the potential for, say, a psychic to be able to remotely, without cutting, destroy a tumor in the brain that was unreachable by surgery. And so, I mean, those were the kinds of the overriding ultimate goals that Bert had for some of these things. Very altruistic in his approach, but yeah, well known in the field of psychiatry. And UFO Dynamics, 2 volumes of that, and then another book called Psychic Nexus, which is fascinating, and the work that he did with Stella Lansing, and yeah, he's just a remarkable man.
Wow. We'll have to have a private conversation about that sometime. And then you can, tell me how to translate.
Yeah.
That would be good. I need all the help I can get. But yeah, it's just fascinating. Some of these people that, that are in a lot of ways behind the scenes. And so I don't know, it's cool to hear you talk about that, especially because I'm looking through Anne's files and I'm just like, wow. You've got to, someday, if you ever get the chance to come out to Salt Lake, you ought to see what I've got. It's so cool. I mean, every day I just go in there and I'm looking, and I know that Alice Dreffel is going to be coming out here pretty quick. And she is bringing Gordon Lore's files from NICAP. And so I'm really excited about that. So
that's
Salt Lake,
what
you guys want to come?
Anne Dreffel is she's another person that I never had any contact with her, but I had the highest respect for her research.
She was a gem. I mean, I look at how methodical she was, and I've said this so much on my shows, but it's just to hear her, because I've got 100 cassettes, or more of her interviewing people, and to hear, she had this voice, okay, this very dainty way of kind of sticking it, hey, I'm holding you on the spot. And I know with her interview with Jacques Vallée for Firestorm, that was a very interesting interview to hear the dynamics and some of the questions that she was asking, and maybe not letting him off the hook on a couple things. It was pretty cool. Very, very cool.
Fascinating.
Yes, so cool. And so I want to we've got a $5 donation, and thank you so much for that. But what are your thoughts on Bob Lazar's story and George Knapp?
Take a deep breath, right?
Yeah, I am really kind of 2 minds on that. I have a lot of respect for George Knapp, and just as an investigative journalist, he's nobody's fool.
He's quite a devious little fellow, isn't he?
He can be, but I think that goes that's in the territory of good investigative journalist. You got to be part weasel to get in, and
that's a good way of putting it.
But I think he's very committed. I think he has a real journalist's view of digging for things. And with the work that he's done trying to ferret out whether Lazar is a fraud or what he's saying is legitimate, I kind of suspend judgment. Bob Lazar tells an incredible story. But if, again, my opinion, if Knapp can't punch holes in it, if he's done it to his satisfaction, I kind of try to stay neutral on it and say, well, it's a possibility.
You think that George Knapp, though, is kind of on I mean, and you don't have to answer this, you can blink once for yes or twice for no. I mean, it seems like George Knapp has, made quite a career and a living for himself, supporting stories that at the end of the day really can't be proven. And for me, looking at that as an investigative journalist, I think that falls flat when you've got people like, that Stanton Friedman and other people have punched a lot of holes in Lazar's case. And at the end of the day, you've got a guy that has some serious allegations and criminal investigations and things that I think can't be overlooked. I think there's a real, for me, there's a real questionable element with some of the people that have come out of the Area 51 thing and that whole kind of the Vegas sideshow. And it is interesting to note, and I want to just say this, just not to throw a little kink in this, but I know that, George Knapp was at one point in time paid by a company called Altamira. And they paid him to basically create dossiers on people and to create online campaigns to bully and discourage people that were protesting nuclear dumping at Yucca Mountain. And so for me, when I see some of the things and the ways in which people have created these movements behind the scenes to almost create trolls in the name of specific people, I find a very to me, I question that. I do question George Knapp's integrity. He knows that. So I just have to throw that out there. Thank you, but you're much more kind than I am.
Well, I see. I'm not aware of what you mentioned there. Which, if I had the details, that might put a whole different light on it for me. I know the only thing that I've dug into at any length in Lazar's story, just because I've got a friend who's an attorney that was able to help look into the whole pandering charge that was brought against Lazar. And he tends to agree that it was magnified way beyond what any other charges like that would amount to, and wonders if there wasn't some sort of governmental or political pressure put on the court system to kind of twist Lazar's arm to get him to shut up, and just another warning to stop. Yeah. So I don't, other than that, I don't know. I've not dug deeply into Lazar's background.
Well, and it is interesting too, and not to get, off on this complete, tangent, but you look at the Harry Reid, you look at Bigelow, you look at the campaign contributions, you look at the fact that all these people are on that specific payroll and running the show for decades, and it's like, I don't know. There's some definite questions that I have, and that's probably why I have so many supporters. Just kidding. That's why I get asked to speak at all the conferences. Yeah, because I'm that girl.
That's we're in good company, you and I, Erica, because that's been a question I've been posed a number of times. Why aren't you invited? I honestly don't care. That's not my the point of my research is not
'Cause
to
you're
get
not trying to
invited
get
to
you
conferences.
well, I mean, and I will tell you, I mean, I have had some wonderful times at different conferences, but, at the end of the day, you're looking at, this certain guy who's got the chicks lined up at this table and he's signing their books and, "Oh, yeah, baby," and, and then just it's like then you've got everybody over here doing the new age thing and all hail to the benevolent space brothers and, the, Nazi sympathizers and, oh, yeah. This oh, man, so
Hey,
go ahead.
everybody's got to have their groupies, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I the one thing I have no regrets over is not being an intimate part of the UFO culture. And maybe you could put it the conference culture. Might be a better way to put it. I mean, I think that I have over the course of 50 plus years, there have been a lot of cults of personality that have developed.
For sure.
I have no use for that. It's not about any one person.
Right.
It's about a search for the truth. And some of the most significant work that's been done, some of the really substantial work that's been done, has been done by people who remain pretty obscure.
Right.
Mhm.
Because they're not they're not in it to make a name for themselves. They're not in it to try and impress someone. They're in it because they have a true curiosity and they want to discover the truth.
Right.
That's once you move past that and you start to make it about yourself, how can I promote myself? I've seen too many people really develop kind of a messiah complex. And
Care to
what,
name any names?
well, I
kidding.
could, but
You're too nice for that. I know.
I'll refrain. I just, if there's one thing that really fries me, it's that. It's, and I have the same feeling about pastors and theologians.
Mhm.
I am not. If you're a pastor who's out to develop a name for himself, who wants to build the next big mega church and be the center of some movement, then you're in it for the wrong reasons.
Right.
And it's the same sort of thing. And I am, and I'm always made a point of this. Even as a pastor, I am in dire need of hearing everything that I teach to other people, because I'm the biggest mess you'll ever find. And I can guarantee it because I live in my own head 24 hours a day. I know what goes on in there. And I always tell people, never put me on a pedestal, because I'll fall off before too long and you're going to be really disappointed then. So just consider I'm just a poor schmuck, just like anybody else. I just happen to know a little more. And because I know a little more, I know how much more I don't know. And that's kind of how I feel about the paranormal. I know a little bit, but there's so much more that I don't know. That's why I can't be dogmatic about any one particular thing. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers.
And I said at the beginning of the show, that's something that I really respect about you. I mean, it's you're not in this to make a name. You're not in this to have girls, buy your books. I mean, but I mean, it's you're doing this just behind the scenes a lot of times, and you're doing it because you have a genuine interest in the subject and the people that are coming forward with sightings reports.
Yeah.
And that is, so I've got to ask you, so I've got a question from Dave. He wants to know what you think about recovered craft.
That's
loaded
another
question.
another interesting question. I am very intrigued to see if anything, no pun intended, materializes from the government, the push to have information released from the government.
What do you think of Art's part? Sorry. Just wanted to see that reaction. Thank you. You don't need to elaborate.
They're interesting chunks of metal. I've heard too many explanations for for what they could be. Too much speculation as to what they might be, and not a lot of proof one way or the other. I think they're interesting. I don't know what you do with them unless you have a bigger context to put them in. If government laboratories or private laboratories under the auspices of the government are analyzing materials that have been recovered, it would be nice to see where Art's parts fit in that whole spectrum of things. My initial impulse is to look at some of the information that Diana Pasulka mentioned in American Cosmic, that Jacques Vallée has mentioned about metamaterials being investigated. I think there may well be samples of unknown materials, unrecognized, strange materials to us. But beyond that, what do you do with the information unless you actually have the analysis of the materials?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're currently waiting on. I'm not sure why I'm getting an echo now.
I know it's kind of spacey.
Yeah, they're waiting on a peer review right now from Dr. Gary Nolan, Jacques Vallée. They've been talking about it for a while, but it just hasn't come out yet. But I talked to Gary, and he told me that they found some interesting things. He wouldn't go into detail, but so that should be interesting.
Yeah, I think the possibility is there. I don't, what to make of it, I don't know for sure yet.
Well,
too much.
Yeah,
again, too much in question.
Well, and that's the thing, and too much in question by the same group of people over and over again without any actual, Anyway.
I was going to mention. You talk about kind of I don't know how you'd want to, sort of the Las Vegas ufological mafia. The whole center of folks there. Frog has taken up residence. There's a lot of, and it really began, I think, in the 80s. There's sort of this very incestuous pool of folks that get together and they kind of interbreed ideas. And no one, or very few, are willing to step up and say, hold on a second. No one's willing to call BS when they should. And again, that doesn't serve anyone well. And I mean, I can think of a number of situations that currently that I'm kind of appalled at, that people have been sucked into. And I think they're ill-advised to buy into it. They're buying into it for, again, a cult of personality rather than substantive facts.
Right. And that has been, that's interesting to me to see, again, like the same cast of characters. I mean, from the, late 60s, early 70s, they're, the Kit Greens of the world, and people that are promoting, a specific narrative. And again, it's like they find people and try to push their agenda. And, I mean, I had that pretty early out of the gate, where you get, you get the people involved, and they're trying to, I don't know what, I guess, handle you, or get you to give them free publicity. And at what end? Because it's like, here you've got the aviary, and you look back and you just go, really? I mean, come on, let's get over the bird names, and let's get over these big personalities that we've got. And it's just like this game playing. And to me, that has served no purpose but to muddy the waters over the years. And all of these, the same group of people of, I mean, you've got Serpo, you've got all of these things that are just, what's the end goal there? Because it's not, in my opinion, anyway. So thank you for talking about that a little bit. And I've got a question from Shadowy Spectrums. He wants to know about the Collins elite a little bit. And so I just wanted to bring up, and because I could talk to you all night. We do these, we start talking to people, and it's like 5 hours later. Okay, that's good. I ought to buy some stock in Depends or something. But you've got final events, and so set us up for that, because you were digging into some things, and you had some people approach you pretty early on, and this is a really fascinating story. So if you don't mind getting into that a little bit, and how Nick Redfern did the research, and the Collins elite, all of that came out.
Let me put a little bit of background to it. In the 80s, there was a real explosion of interest in very new agey sorts of things. The whole Shirley MacLaine out on a limb, channeling this guy and that guy, and Ramtha, and just things were just going. It was blossoming. Let's put it that way. And I began to realize that what was missing from all of this frantic search for spiritual truth. No one was providing a Christian perspective on any of these topics. It was all based in very, very Eastern religions, and some very much home-brewed spirituality. And so in 1988, I resigned as the MUFON state director for Nebraska, and started my master's program in theology, because I thought, I always been very interested in theology. I've been a Christian for a number of years, and thought, I want to be equipped to be able to deal with this in an effective way with people. And so completed my master's, was ordained, and in 1991, I was approached by two gentlemen who called me on the phone, wanted to meet with me. So they were DOD researchers. I said, yeah, we could do that. So we met at the Cornhusker Hotel here in Lincoln. I was an art director at that time, and just a few blocks from my office downtown. So I walked over there. We met and had lunch. And I believe I know why they located me, how they located me. I at one time had worked with a coworker of mine. His father was the civilian equivalent of a major general in the Air Force, the Air Force Scientific Research Laboratory at Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, at Offutt Air Force Base. Mm-hmm.
And that fellow he's been named publicly.
Not this one, I don't believe.
Okay.
But I would I would ask my friend, because we would have conversations about it, like in the thick of investigating the Rendlesham Forest incident. We would talk, and I'd say, ask your dad if he knows anything about this. So I think his dad was aware of me, and I believe these two researchers were at that Office of Research and heard about me from him.
Okay.
And that's how they knew to get a hold of me. So we met. They explained this entire scenario of government research into ultimately psychotronic weapons. But the UFO question was kind of involved in that whole thing. But they said they were facing a dilemma because as they were both Christians, and as Christians, they were concerned about the ethics of some of the experimentation that was going on within this program. Explained the background of the physics behind it, and David Bohm's wholeness in the implicate order, that sort of thing. And then went on to say that this program was dealing with contact with non-human intelligences. And they hoped to be able to weaponize this contact and maybe technologically learn some things that would allow them to weaponize devices that would ultimately lead them to be able to perform acts of negative healing. They wanted to kill people at a distance. They went through an outline of experiences that they'd had where some things that had seemed to be very positive in nature with these non-human intelligences, or they were couched in very positive terms, but there were always very negative outcomes to that and to exposure to this. They mentioned some of the work that had been done to enhance their efforts that had taken into account some of the things that Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard had done under the direction of Aleister Crowley. Just bizarre things. And I'm thinking to myself, this is some of the strangest things I've ever run across. They showed me some photos of experimental participants in this, 2 men and a woman who had been killed allegedly at a distance in a laboratory setting. All three were in what appeared to be the same dentist's chair, very dentist-like chair, monitoring equipment in the background. One had allegedly been suffocated. One had been killed by a distance-induced heart attack, and the other had been killed by having the occipital area of their skull crushed at a distance.
Wow.
Was not explained to me whether these were volunteers, whether they were prisoners. No idea.
I think the prisoner angle is probably a good one.
Could be. One of the last things that they said was, because they knew about my work with the whole Rendlesham Forest Bentwaters incident, was that was part of this program, and that the object that was seen at Bentwaters in Rendlesham Forest was a holographic projection that was capable of leaving physical traces.
Wow. And
that some of the people who were present during that were more interested in the reaction of the servicemen than they were in the events.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where we left it. We were in I had one other face-to-face meeting Another instance where they just handed a disc back to me, a floppy disk, with some information for Linda Howe. But essentially, that was it. If anyone's interested, you can go to academia.edu and you'll find the entire story of what took place, as well as the conversations, if you will, between Linda Howe and these two gentlemen that she termed the writers. It's fascinating stuff. I still, to this day, I mean, when I first made mention of this publicly, I said, I don't know that I have no way to judge whether this is true, false. I don't know. It's a fantastic story, but these two guys are who they say they are. The reason they came to me was because of my background in UFO and paranormal research and my training as a theologian and a pastor. So they felt comfortable talking to me, they said, because they knew they could ask me to invoke the sanctity of the confessional and not reveal who they are. Mm-hmm. And I agreed to that. Again, I still can't vouch for the accuracy of it. But the interesting thing, when Nick Redfern ran across this research in 2007, I believe, got a hold of me, he was able to dig that, and he was able to actually confirm the majority of what I was told. So that takes me another step closer to saying, yeah, there's something going on here. I never heard the term Collins Elite. They never used that term. The first time I encountered that was from Nick when he told me about his research. Mm-hmm. I believe they're probably still active. Not necessarily the gentlemen that spoke with me, but this group. I think Lou Elizondo has, at least in a roundabout way, referenced this group when he's talked about the forces at the Pentagon that say you can't deal with this because these are demons. And
well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because that's something that they want to promote. You know, like Bigelow, Kit Green, put off. I mean, that's it's Scott. You've got an echo, I think. It's not. It's like, I don't know. Somebody's got an echo. Scott's mic is muted, but it is really interesting because they're kind of proud of this. You know, I mean, the conversations I've had, I remember going to Earth Tech and seeing Kit or not Kit, excuse me, Put Off and Davis, and asking them about the Collins Elite, because back then I thought it was something different than I think it is now, and I think now it's them. I mean, they're continuing this, and I think it's almost just another, I don't know, it's something shady's going on. And I want to ask you too, could this have been people that were showing you things and perhaps saying that this is a paranormal thing when actually this was just a continuation of MK Ultra and it was a way to muddy the waters?
Could very well be. I mean, that's why I've always been, I've always thought if they weren't sincere in coming to me, wanting to know, wanting to make me aware of what they saw as a serious breach of ethics in this kind of experimentation, if they weren't sincere, they probably wanted me to really run with this and spread it all over the place. Well, that's not me. I'm not that big an idiot. I may be stupid, but I'm not quite that stupid. So, they picked the wrong guy for that. But, and even from a strictly theological standpoint, There is this whole misnomer that Christianity and science are at polar opposites with one another. That is so far from the truth. From Francis Bacon to Isaac Newton to, I mean, the Kepler, who said science is thinking God's thoughts after him. That's the whole point of science. Science is looking for truth in the physical world. Mm-hmm. Theology is looking for truth in the spiritual world. We're looking for the same truth, following two different paths to the same point.
Sure.
No right-thinking theologian would say, don't investigate this because it's demonic. A right-thinking theologian would say, let's investigate this and see if it is demonic.
Right. Because
we may learn something from this. So you don't turn your back on it. You dig deeper. And so that mindset always kind of bugs me, because it's like the classic parody of what someone would expect a Christian to do. And it's so far from, and that's not to say that there aren't sincere believers out there who would have exactly that response, but it's a pretty short-sighted response. So
this is so fascinating. Thank you. And I have to, go back to, so these people approach you, and this does sound, and Linda Moulton Howe, I mean, and that does sound to me, having been approached by, I mean, you get into public sense and you get approached by all sorts of people, and they do try to insert things. So you'll run with it, and then they can create this grand cover story. And then you can say, well, we had these people at the Pentagon that were trying to shut down funding, and these ultra conservative Christians. And you think, wait a minute. I mean, this is you are talking about you. Let's get a clue here. And so I've been kind of harping that home. I mean, I need to get over that. Therapy would be good. I don't know. Group therapy, a binky. Give me a binky and a blanket, a bottle of milk, and put me in the corner for, I don't know. But it is interesting in Nick's book, because he did take that story and then he did a lot of work. And, I've talked with Nick over the years about this, and he was, I'm still hoping that I can write the second chapter to Final Events, and that should be fairly interesting, and maybe not what people want at that group of people, out there. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. So when the story came out about the Collins elite, like, were you shocked at that?
I wasn't shocked. I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised that, I guess I wasn't foolish to put this out in the public, because I mean, all I could do is say, here's the story I was told.
Right.
I don't know what to do with it past this. I've checked everything I can. Beyond that, if you know of anything, let me know. And so when Nick was able to actually begin to confirm some things, I thought, this is really fascinating. It does exist. And maybe these guys weren't trying to play me. Maybe they were really being sincere about it. I can only speculate as to their motives, but it was fascinating to me that there was confirmation of this some 15 plus years after it had happened. And I had just sort of thought, well, maybe this is just a one-off thing. And, but it wasn't. So.
And it's fascinating, because I know who you're talking about as a person that we were talking about him the other day, and I was going to contact him and actually get him on the show tonight, but I'll have to do that and bring both of you on, because he's a very just interesting man with some great stories and ties to Utah and Hill Air Force Base. And and all sorts of things. So it's just it's so fascinating.
I
But
got a question for Ray, Erica. So, I was told last year when they first started talking about this, Lou Elizondo was saying that they were trying to stop him from doing the research because they felt that the phenomena was demonic. Um, and I was told by somebody who's highly connected to research the family. And there's a very highly rated documentary on Netflix
it's a great
called
documentary.
It's About Them.
It's
Yeah,
And
it's good. I've seen it.
yes, it is
And I'm
good.
wondering if that's the same group of people, or a different title, or they're all involved together. You know,
You
do
know,
you
I
know
have
much about them, Ray?
only really what I've seen in the documentary.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a very well done documentary and fascinating
Yeah.
topic. But whether there's a connection there, I don't know.
Okay.
It is interesting though, because when I watched that documentary, Scott, I mean, I thought of some of the people that have been inserted, I mean, that have been using the UFO subject or using the New Age community or using, I mean, just honing into some of these people that mistrust the government, and they can kind of hone in there and then insert their belief systems or really steer a whole generation of people, as we've seen with QAnon, which I talk about, which to me is very disturbing, and something that we need to look at, especially in the UFO community. But so it's fascinating,
It's
and
one of
it's also probably not good for one's longevity to look into this stuff too much, because there's a lot of dark money floating around out there.
I think one of the one of the easiest things to do is, especially in today's climate, is to create your very own conspiracy theory. Because you get just a few people, you drop just enough, kind of hooded hints here and there, and it takes off on its own. And it's a very dangerous thing. And to get sucked into things like that is, it's sad to see.
It is. It is sad to see, because it's so destructive, and I think, again, it pulls you away from actually doing genuine research on
Yeah.
something, and it taints things. And for me, when I see people, like Elizondo, and I've said this before, and again, it doesn't make me the favorite, the first on the dance card, but to see, these people using the patriot and, some of these key phrases that have been used over and over, decade after decade, to instill, certain camaraderie among people. I mean, I love my country. I consider myself a patriot, but not that kind of patriot. And so I think that's a dangerous thing. What does that have to do with UFO research, is what I'm wondering. But I don't know.
Shortly before I was contacted by these two gentlemen, I had an interesting encounter with someone who has peripherally some Pentagon connections, and their friend. It was, I think we've talked about this briefly, you and I, in private conversation, Erica. I had a period of 4 or 5 hours where I wasn't sure if I was being threatened, bullied, or seduced to buy into something. And it was the most bizarre thing. And it's a murky place when you get into some of these areas.
Right.
And I can see how some people would very easily buy into it. They would be seduced by this kind of thing.
And they are.
And they are, yeah. And it,
yeah, that's interesting. And I appreciate so much our conversations and things. I learn a lot from you, and you have, in your, I mean, decades of research, you have been approached. You are grounded enough to say, wait a minute, maybe this information is, you're not going to jump out and say, this is what it is. You're going to say, I'm putting it out there. Take it for what it is.
Yeah.
So
That's the
commendable.
only responsible way to do it. I feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so the you have the two people at the DoD, the two channels of people that are approaching you, and that was back in the 80s. And then how much contact did you have with them after the initial meeting?
I had one additional briefer meeting. I had a phone number and a post office box to contact them. I could call and leave a message, and if they chose, they'd get back to me. The reason they gave me a post office box, they were aware in some way of Linda Howe's book.
Alien Harvest.
Let me look here. Glimpses of Other Realities.
Right.
And asked if I could get them a copy of it because they were interested in seeing it. So I got a hold of Linda, and we got them a book, and then they sent some comments and questions back to Linda. She sent some questions to them, and so on, back and forth. But that was really kind of it, because the contact was always initiated from them to me. I could reach out, but if they weren't interested or it wasn't safe for them, I had no idea. I mean, all I could do is reach out and wait and see.
So I know, one thing that you have said is you wondered why, contact you, if these people were so concerned about the moral and ethical implications, why didn't they turn this over to somebody that, I'm not saying not to reach out to you, but why didn't they turn it over to somebody that could investigate this and shut down the program?
That was one of my main questions. I mean, who am I? Why would you come to me?
Right. It's like, even though I can understand, I have just tremendous respect for you, and I can understand why they would, but then you look at, why would somebody approach Jeremy Corbell with the $1 million UFO secret? Or why would, this should be, if we're getting all of this information, in my opinion, it should come from, and I'm not saying that you're not, but it's why are specific people chosen, and why, that's just, if that bothers those people so much, then shut down the program.
Yeah. That's the really, maybe out of the whole situation, that's probably the most baffling aspect to me. I have no power. I have no particular influence. What do you expect me to do with it? That's why, that kind of gives me the feeling that possibly they were just interested in, we want someone who understands the paranormal and who's theologically grounded to give us an opinion. Because, what am I going to do? If you're really that concerned with it, take it to the New York Times or the Washington Post. What do I do? Because I can't. Who's going to listen to me if I take this information and go to the New York Times with it? If they would choose to run it, which is highly unlikely, I would look like an idiot. They would not take it seriously. So why me? That's one thing I've never been able to understand, which in a sense gives me a little more confidence that maybe it was a genuine approach for their own personal satisfaction. Don't know.
I know, it's interesting. It's also fascinating, and I think and I know that Scott, has been. We both had people. I think you're in the subject and you're approached by people, and you're asked to steer narratives and different things, and it really is an interesting thing. And then you go down the rabbit holes of promoting somebody that's seeing shape-shifting alien or shape-shifting werewolves, and
Interestingly enough, I have a phone call with a man tomorrow who has been sending me private messages for a good long while now, a couple months. And he claims to work for Northrop Grumman and I forgot the other one. So he apparently wants to talk to me, and so I finally gave in. So we're supposed to talk tomorrow. I'm not sure if he has some kind of story that he's, like you said, Ray, he maybe wants me to take it to the UFO community so that I can be the one that's going to spread this story. I'm not really sure what he's after, but I'm going to give him his time and, see what he's got to say.
Yeah. I think that's all we can do. Listen with an open mind and weigh what we hear.
Right.
You're so grounded, Ray.
You get kicked around for long enough, you you become hopefully wisely cautious. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And in that does, I mean, it just, again, it's like, why approach anybody in the UFO community? Like, really? Because I mean, they can just see this little echo chamber, and it's like you find a little fanboy over here, and you're, oh, you are so cool. We're giving you the secrets. And I mean, I've been there. I've trust me, I've got so many bumps and bruises that are out there for everybody in the free world to see on my radio show. But it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just really, really interesting stuff. But I mean, Ray, so what, after all of your time doing this, what are your thoughts, and how, or have they changed over the 50 years that you've been doing this?
I think there's one aspect that I feel very confident about, and that's that there definitely is a spiritual aspect to some of this, not all of it, but to some of it.
Sorry, Ray, if you need to take a little break, just let us know. We've got. Are you okay?
I'm out of water, but I may take you up on that in a little bit. When again, as a Christian theologian, that's my perspective that I look at this from. And the simplest way that I always use to describe it, when you're dealing with entities, and let's use the government term that was dropped to me, non-human intelligences. If those entities are denying the truth of one school of thought, allowing all the others to go without comment, that raises alarm bells to me. So in simple terms, I've always said, if these things were really of a higher order who understood things that we're incapable of understanding, they might say, all of your religions are wrong. You have a completely warped view of spirituality. But they don't. They never say, that Buddha, man, what a nut. They never say, who dreamed up Krishna? And what's this whole thing with Ganesh and the elephant head? Come on now.
Good point.
They never criticize anything except Christianity. And then Jesus becomes, well, he's one of us and we sent him to you. And once he was done here, now he's on a ship that orbits Venus and he's coming back. But what's in the Bible is not at all what he said. You can't trust that. So the only system of thought that's consistently criticized is Christianity. So I look at it from that point of view and I say, okay, then since Christianity talks about deceptive spirits, and since the only school of thought that's being criticized is Judeo-Christianity, maybe that should be a big warning flag that starts to wave and say, these guys have an agenda. These non-human intelligences have an agenda, and maybe we need to take that into account. So I look at it and I say some of these things, not all, but some of them, and particularly in instances where people are in contact on a regular basis with non-human intelligences, whether they're aliens, spirits, whatever they are. And this type of information starts to come across, this type of criticism starts to come across, and the denigration of Christianity occurs, then I have a problem with that. And I think, this may well be deceptive spirits, may be demonic spirits. I don't know another rational, logical way to look at that. Again, if they criticized everything, I would be much more open to say, oh, all right, well, tell me. Then you give me the explanation that works for you. But they never do that. They never do that. So it's a very one-sided approach. So in the big scope of things, I look at it as the paranormal as a whole is quite a mysterious and fascinating place. I think there's a lot that we can learn from it. But I think that there are also dangerous spots that we can step into that we need to be cautious about. If we accept everything as a visit from our benevolent space brothers, we're deluding ourselves. Mm-hmm. If we say everything you see is demonic, we're deluding ourselves. Mm-hmm. Because it's not. It's not. The hard work comes when we have to try to discern what's what and separate, okay, what's legitimate from what isn't. And it's an adventure to do that. It's also a lot of hard work too. And there are people who are so invested in, well, let's just keep it with the cult of personality. They're so invested in any one particular cult of personality that they can't abide any sort of criticism of that particular person because that's their messiah.
Right.
And I'm going to take a break and grab another water.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to, grab some water. We won't keep you too much longer. You're a love. I appreciate it. Grab some water. And Scott and I will just have a little chat. Scott, are you staying out of trouble?
Why?
I know. You just have this problem. You and I are like, trouble. We got to take a break a little bit, I think.
It looks for me.
It's been looking for me too. And I'm telling you, I'm pulling back, I'm shutting the curtains tonight and just go be gone, evil creature of the night. But so what else is, how's life? Are you good? Are you?
I'm hanging in there. I'm starting a new job soon, so that should be interesting. And I'm trying to do, having a hard time with the Stella Lansing. I'm trying to reach her children and, just having a hard time. I'm going to be going up to talk to the owners of the property that own it now and see how that goes. So hopefully we'll be able to, I'm thinking springtime, we should be able to try to pull it all together and do a little short documentary. So.
Well, I think that's cool. And I have some stuff that we need to talk about with the Androffel files and things. And so I want to just also give a little shout out because I have not paid enough attention to everybody in chat tonight, and Amy and Jim and V and Charles, Dave, everybody. I appreciate the way you are so respectful, and don't, I mean, you see a lot of other chat rooms that are pretty bombastic, and we've got a good
Yeah.
out here sometimes when we get the occasional troll and things, but I do appreciate that, because I think we're all invested in finding the truth, and we all understand that there are some interesting players and things going on that we need to be aware of. And so, Ray, I've got to ask you a question, because Amy is in chat, and I want to tell her to give Dinah a love for me. But Ray, have you ever investigated astrotheology?
I'm not quite sure what that is.
Okay, well, there you go. I guess Amy will have to tell us.
I'll be happy to enlighten as best I can. I've never run across that term.
I'll ask her. Definitely. I've not either. So it's very interesting. So, and we're going to get to the show closed. Ray, I've got so many questions. Barry Greenwood is going to be mad at me, because he sent me, in fact, I've got to just ask one question. He has some great questions. Let me get on here really quickly and see. So he wants to know about the Fort Detrick's McGuire story of 78 and Ellsworth Air Force Base, November 1977, as this was the beginning of a persistent document fakery.
The McGuire, Fort Dix McGuire, long story short, an alien shot at the end of a runway. Ellsworth Air Force Base, long story short, a UFO encounter by some guards on patrol. And if I remember correctly, it's been years since I've dug deep into this. One or two of the men had their M16s vaporized, and one of the men, I believe, was killed. If I'm remembering correctly, may not have been killed, but anyway, at any rate, their M16s vaporized. Fantastic stories at the time. I remember when the documents first came out, but it didn't take a whole lot of time before it was discovered that they were fake. What are you going to do? I mean, faker's gonna fake. So
don't make me sing
again,
that song.
You have to be cautious about what you've got. And if you don't jump until you know how deep the water is, because sometimes it can look pretty deep, but it's awful shallow. And you get a short, sharp shock when you come up at the bottom, and it's not necessarily pleasant.
Well, that's awesome. Okay, and then Project Moondust.
Project Moondust, I had great hopes for that initially. I got a big trove of documents, and I think Todd Zeckel maybe had gotten some before I had. But Project Moondust seemed to hold a lot of promise for potentially hints at recovered non-terrestrial spacecraft. But the point of the project was to recover Soviet spacecraft. And some interesting reports in there, some UFO sightings and that kind of thing from South America. But virtually everything that showed up in the documents ended up being recovered pieces of spacecraft. So it was a hopeful time to dig into it, but didn't get a lot of things that panned out in terms of substantial information.
Okay. Thank you. Can you just plan on coming back again and again?
Sure.
And it's just too much fun. And I get so excited, and then I go down this track, and I meant to go over on this track, but I still, I've got just such great information and such a wonderful interview. I just think the world of you, and you look amazing. You really do.
Well,
Yeah. And I have to tell everybody, you had neck surgery 2 weeks ago. You had a discectomy. You had on two vertebrae, right?
yeah, yeah.
And then what else did they do?
I live to tell about it. Yeah.
And you're moving. You're not like
Yeah.
Robotron.
I am so thankful that I've recovered as quickly as I have. Yeah, they took a chunk of my vertebrae out because I had a bone spur that was kinking my spinal cord.
Wow.
And I'm starting to get some relief, and mobility is improving a little bit, and hands are getting a little better, getting some fine motor control back. It's tough when you spent a career as an artist to lose your fine motor control, and your handwriting looks like sort of a very slow second grader. But,
Sounds familiar.
but it's coming back. The surgeon said expect it to take about a year before things really settle down and you get back to what's going to be your new normal. So
I just am amazed because I've worked with, people, I was telling you, over 20 years that have had different spinal surgeries and issues. And I am amazed at what the mobility what is.
I am,
wow.
I'm so grateful. My surgeon saw him just last week, and he was very helpful and very impressed. I had been told to anticipate anywhere from 3 to 6 months with a neck brace on constantly. And after he saw me, he said, you can go ahead and take it off unless you're going up and down stairs or if you're riding in the car. He said, if you're just walking across a flat surface at home, you can take it off. So I'm so unencumbered now.
Yes.
I do have to sleep with it on, and that's miserable. But
I can't even imagine.
That's a small price to pay.
I had shoulder surgery. I have degenerative, just my orthopedic surgeon and my eye doctor told me that I have the body of an 80-year-old man. I'm thinking the bedside manner not happening on that part, but I had to. They went in and did microfracture surgery on both shoulders, and so they drilled holes in the bone, and then they detached my biceps and screwed it in, lower. And it was really, it was interesting. I'm really glad I did Pilates because my mobility, I recovered very quickly. But you're going around and it's awkward, So, but I'm really happy that you've made such a great recovery, and you're just such a wonderful. You have such a wonderful energy about you, and I appreciate you spending the time and talking about things. And you got to come back because we've got more MIB questions. I've got more digging into final events and all sorts of things. And Rendlesham, we haven't even talked about, all of that. But I look forward to having you back.
Oh, Erica, it'll be my pleasure. You're one of my favorites.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot to me, and I feel the same about you. And so, and academia.com, or is that
.edu.
EDU, okay. And that's where people can find. You've got several things there.
Yeah, all available to download for free.
Okay, that's wonderful. I would definitely recommend that. And my best to you and your family. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too, and you, Scott, as well. Great
Yeah,
to
it was
meet you.
nice meeting you, Ray.
And good luck with the Stella Lansing documentary.
That's so cool.
Thank you.
Keep me posted on that. I'm interested in that.
I will.
Well, that's cool. We've got, and Scott, you have procured a very wonderful guest for next week, which Ray mentioned, Diana Pasulka briefly. So that is going to be a great interview. I'm really looking forward to that. And Ray, I just have to say thank you for making tonight such a wonderful night. I was so depressed when I got in here tonight. I'm just like, I'm done. I'm going to go paint. I'm going to be an artist that's licking the paintbrush, cutting off my ear. I don't know what's going to happen. Something that sounds so dramatic, but I mean, it's just, you get in those little funks in ufology. I'm definitely in one, and you made me feel better. So thank you.
If I can lift your spirits and put a smile on your face,
you did it.
That makes my day.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And much love. And I hope you heal. And I look forward to talking to you. And I want to thank everybody in there again in chat and for people who are supporting the show. And Charles, thank you for becoming a Patreon. And I want to give a big shout out to Mario, who is always here every week. He has been a constant support for me for years. And for Thanksgiving, I want to thank all of you because you're the reason I'm here. I do love doing this when I'm not, having my Van Gogh moments, I guess, or needing to hide in a corner with my binky. But I do love this. And thank you all for supporting the show, for hitting the like and subscribe or whatever we're doing on YouTube today. Make sure you share the information and just know that we are always here and we're willing to stick our neck out to get to the truth. It's not easy. And Lord knows I don't have enough money for hair dye these days, but whatever. Support the show. Dye my hair and get me Botox because Mama needs some Botox. That's all I'm saying. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful night and thank you all. Happy Thanksgiving. And we will catch you guys next time. And maybe I can figure out how to end the show. I'm telling you, it's credit real. Okay. Thanks, you guys.